Hi, so this is a quick recap on Unit 2. Every time I'm going to try and do a recap when we close off the forums and we move on to another unit. So we had dealt with a lot of the questions already in the Collaborate. I've done sort of a half recap, so I'm only going to tackle the half that we hadn't looked at. What are so one of the threads, what are Paulo Freire's key components of critical pedagogy? So we've looked at two elements, the critique, which is very postmodern, and then the call for transformative action, which is very based on critical theory. On the critique, we've looked at this condemnation and challenge of the banking model, which sees knowledge as being seen as a commodity, which is transferred from teacher to student. The student has a passive role. The teacher also is sort of resigned to sort of very automated roles, and it's Freire describes it as being, the role of almost a line worker in a factory. And the objective is really compliance. So compliance into a system where the learner is not actually led to challenge and think proactively, but you just fit into a job or routine or things that our society demands of them. In the transformative action piece, you have the need to shake the learner out of this. So we call it conscientization, the act of making the learner become aware. Again, this is a student-led process. So the teacher is not doing it, but the teacher can create, obviously, winning conditions for this to happen. And then you have several steps that will lead to empowerment and transformative action, again, led by the student. First will be for the educator to support the student finding voice, the student finding, well, actually it should be identity first. So the student finding identity as an oppressed and marginalized learner. And again, the teacher is going to have a role of supporting that. Once the learner has reclaimed identity, they will try and find a voice, and the teacher's role will be to amplify and support that voice. With that will come the need for the learner to connect to a community of like-minded persons, people, really probably other learners that are oppressed, marginalized in the same way as that student are. So, and to create a sense of affiliation with that community. And again, there the teacher will have a specific role in facilitating and supporting and developing that availability of a community and other like-minded folks. And that hopefully leads to ideally to a re-empowerment of the learner, and then the learner being re-empowered leads to a transformative action, which is the renegotiation of power dynamics within the educational environment in which they are. So really the re-emergence of it, something different in terms of learning environment. How is it implemented in school and in educational spaces? Well, it's that second part, rather the whole sort of critical theory base. So Freire suggests a lot of very specific roles that the teacher has to do. So support the conscientization, support the development of voice and identity, support the creation of a community and affiliation, and then support that the last phase as well, that empowerment leading to transformative action of the environment itself. So it's quite challenging, right? And that leads us to the third, which is what are some of the challenges you foresee? It's a role that becomes very subversive, very challenging for the educator, because by supporting the learner, you challenge the institution yourself. And so therefore you have to find a peace in a sort of ambivalent role where you are both employee and challenging the employer. And that can be tough, and we'll see that. Obviously, when we look at critical pedagogy implementation, we have to look at people's age, their experience, their security of employment, all sorts of things that will mean that they may be more likely to venture in this field than others who have precarity of employment, maybe temporary, such as subs. Obviously, if you're in these sort of situations, it's going to be very hard to do critical pedagogy because you don't have the security required to not feel threatened by doing this, right? And having the fear of losing your job. So the power dynamics, they affect you as well as a person wanting to develop critical pedagogy. So it's problematic. Another challenge is something that we'll see in some of the texts, is that sometimes teachers misunderstand not necessarily the key elements of critical pedagogy, but its intent and its power, and can be satisfied with half-hearted efforts that look like cultural awareness and inclusion, etc., but that don't transform the power dynamics in the classroom. So it's an effort in the right direction. It's definitely something related to social justice, but it doesn't lead to that transformative action piece. The class continues to be structured with the same power dynamics. There's nothing radical that happens there. And that's often by either lack of, so we saw it could be because of fear, but it could also be for lack of knowledge or lack of understanding of that political dimension that exists in critical pedagogy. Okay, I'm just looking quickly at other questions that you had. So we have to define it. So I would say it's very hard to define in English with concise way, with layperson terms, but it's a theory that encourages you to critique conventional forms of education as being grounded in inequitable power dynamics, so unjust power dynamics, and to support the learner in gaining autonomy in challenging that status quo in the institution or in the classroom, and challenging these power dynamics through a process of identity, of development of identity, of voice, and of re-empowerment. Okay, that's as concise as I can get, really. Limitation of phrase model. It's 50 years old, and what has changed. So I think what really I wanted you to pick up on there, and you had one reading that did that for you, is that really Freire obviously was pre-internet and pre-technology, and he never really had a chance to really consider how the emergence of technology would affect that. So we will see, in fact, that it has had a wild impact on critical pedagogy, with originally in the years pre-2000, a lot of scholars in critical pedagogy being very worried about technology because they saw it as something that would amplify the injustices and the inequitable power dynamics that existed already. That's where the term, digital divide was created by critical pedagogues, saying this will increase the gap with financial and in terms of literacy and in terms of access to things. And then there was a sort of flip that you can see in the literature from the year 2000, 2005, where suddenly a lot of scholars in critical pedagogy sort of reconsidered their original position, started saying, actually, maybe we were wrong. And actually, it's also, yes, there's dangers, but there's also incredible opportunities with technology. So when we look at voice and we look at identity, the simple fact that your students now have on their phones recording tools that enable them to produce material that is extremely professional in quality and in the ability to carry a message is going to have a huge impact on that development of voice, that development of identity. And as you probably see in a lot of the clips that we've seen already, will enable to carry that act of conscientization and that voice of the learner, because through songs or through videos or through pop videos, by pop I mean popular culture videos, you end up having a material that reaches a degree of professionalism that we couldn't think of doing before the year 2000. So the end result is that now you have a lot of critical pedagogues that actually are also seeing technology as being a huge affordance, a tool to reach some of these objectives. So a lot of writing here. Now, it doesn't mean that their fears have not gone away. So together, both the fears and the opportunities and envisioning the opportunities have come together to represent a body of literature that now we call critical digital pedagogy. And it's a field that really distinguishes itself by both its hopes and its fears. Keeping these fears from pre-2000, but also looking at the potential that's appeared since 2000. And we will come back to that, and we'll have sections where we look particularly at a parallel between critical pedagogy and new literacies, and we'll come back to that and to critical digital pedagogy. So that's it. That finishes the wrap up for Unit 2, and I'll do the same when we get to the end of Unit 3.